Welcome to the latest episode of our video podcast here at DeVono Cresa. The impact of the pandemic on the workplace and subsequently the workforce has been quite evident, and as we head into the autumn and winter months, it's apparent that the virus and subsequent government guidelines continue to shape both current and future real estate requirements. To discuss some of those trends that we've been seeing over recent months and what we can expect to see going forward, I brought together a couple of colleagues here, joined by Chris Lewis, who heads up our DeVono Cresa's Office Agency, and Gemma Foord, who leads our flexible office team. Welcome. There are a number of factors that are influencing business real estate decisions at present. The level of working from home, the stuttered return to the office, cash preservation, and wider economic pressures, just to name a few. Chris, how have businesses reacted so far to these factors, especially when it comes to evaluating their workplace requirements?
I guess the principal thing is people have taken sort of time out to really think about what the future might mean for their business from an occupational point of view. That's meant people putting decisions on hold. It's meant them looking for short-term measures to help them get through a period. Obviously, depending on scale, it really dictates how agile a business can be in terms of some of those decisions, because many businesses, their lead time to activate a project and move it forward will be quite significant. Whereas for smaller businesses, actually being relatively footloose means something like Flex opens up a huge optionality for them, being able to look at temporary accommodation whilst they just get to grips with what the future means. But ultimately, everyone is focused on the same thing, which is trying to understand what everything that's going on now means for their medium, long-term occupational requirements.
And one thing that we've noticed from our research that we've done on the central London office market is that availability has been increasing, and part of that increase has come from tenant space that has been put back onto the market, as it were, so surplus amount of space from occupiers. Do we expect this to be a trend that picks up pace as we go forward over the next 6 months?
Well, there's historically relatively limited supply of space in London, and probably the biggest supplier looking forward of space into the market will be tenants. We're talking to clients who are considering significant reductions in footprint within their current lease terms. So there will be a lot of what we call grey space coming onto the market without a doubt, and there'll be fantastic opportunity for some businesses from that grey space. But a lot of people who are considering exiting space can only do so if they're 100% sure that what's happening now isn't just a kind of short-term issue. It's actually going to affect the long-term operation of the business.
And so any knee-jerk reaction now in the let's say the heat of the current crisis should really be carefully considered.
Very much so, because exiting space now, you're kind of making a decision that won't just have impacts for the next few months. It will have potentially impacts on significant time looking forward.
And one of the elements that you touched on was about not just reducing size of space, but also kind of more flexibility. I just want to turn to Gemma at this point, and there's a widening cohort of businesses looking at flexible office space as an option. Previous leasehold clients or existing leasehold clients. Can the sector rise to this challenge? Obviously, it's suffered themselves over the past 6 months. So what can businesses expect?
You're right, Shaun. I think the sector has suffered just like many businesses have, and I think they've used the time wisely over the last 4 or 5 months, I'm sure it's even longer now, to really bunker down on their efforts, consolidate good working practices, and also make sure that their centres are as COVID compliant as they can be through various measures. So that's been one of the key things. And also there are several leasing models and there are several scenarios that Flex lends to. So you've got everything from license agreements to short form leases for longer, more managed floor spaces that are self-contained and fully branded, paring it right back down to kind of daily pop-in memberships for people who are looking at, again, from the work from home perspective, they want to bring members of the team into a working environment where they can have all of the kind of office necessities in one place and as and when they need it. So again, financially, it's very kind of flexible.
So the image of the serviced office has come on leaps and bounds, but there is over the past year or so, there's this image of let's say co-working as being kind of this let's say a free for all kind of model. That should not be the image that is portrayed of the sector. Am I right?
Quite right. I think again, a lot of people just band around the word co-working and managed space and flex space. Ultimately, it does sit aside kind of different strands. You have incubator spaces, predominantly for the startup world. You have co-working spaces, which again were open plan workspaces whereby you could kind of come together in a kind of ecosystem of community, learn off one another in terms of business interaction, and there was often a lot of high density around those spaces. So that they're the kind of, I suppose they're the centres that have been most challenged, especially when they've been new entrants or they haven't been so well funded. Then you've got serviced offices and managed spaces, those traditional core providers who offer private offices, have been doing it, they're in their 4th decade in the UK of providing traditional flexible workspaces in various guises. So I think when everyone or when the focus in the market or in the news has been that co-working will it's the death of co-working, I don't think it's quite like that. Again, we will see some M&A in the market, mergers and acquisitions will come out of this, and those that aren't well funded and backed will struggle to survive. But again, that's sadly what we're seeing across many sectors at the moment. But fundamentally, a lot of providers out there and the lion's share have used this time to actually make really COVID safe compliant spaces and actually incentivize clients and lure them back in through really great working environments. We're back in the office and it's working well for us at the moment.
It's that diverse range of product that is being offered now, which is more than what we saw 5 years ago. So Chris, is that one of the reasons why we're starting to see a lot more traditional leasehold transactions convert into a flex transaction? So a lot more dual searches are happening, and those businesses who were heavily wedded to the concept of leasehold are now kind of almost divorcing from that idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a divorce. Maybe it's a trial separation. I think the reality is that at the moment people are having to make a call on what their future needs are. You'd be pretty bold to enter into a new long-term lease because there's an awful lot of experimental working practices being looked at the moment, and until those have kind of run their course and people are really confident about the future, it makes perfect sense to look at something like a flex space of some shape or form to kind of bridge the gap. I think one of the trends that will probably pass across is that a lot of the environments that are created within flex space tend to be far more kind of hospitality based than perhaps you would get in conventional leasehold. And I think you'll start to see some of those techniques and approaches kind of borrowed by the conventional sector as people try and reimagine what their workspace looks like. I think you'll start to see a lot of that hospitality element feed through.
This is something that we've discussed in our previous editions of The Occupier about businesses, landlords need to become a lot more tenant-centric and servicing the customers that they've got within their buildings, and that goes straight through also to the flex operators, where service is going to be key to get those clients on board. So with that in mind, there's another part of the let's say the flexible range, which is those remainder leases that you touched on earlier on. they could be that stopgap, could they not, for those companies who prefer a leasehold situation where they've got their own space, as it were. And as we start to see that increase, will that type of space become more mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've basically just got a shelf with a lot of different products on it, all of which ultimately fulfill the same requirement, which is basically, or provide the same solution, which is basically short-term space. And it will come either from conventional, even landlords are looking now at how they can provide short-term conventional space.
Which is great, right? Because that's what's been missing for so long. I think that landlords, and even you've spoken to this, that landlords really need to come to the party and look at the flex market and actually adapt and evolve their models so that they are capturing more clients from that persuasion, let's call it. And again, I think that's great for the clients. I think the clients are the winner in all this because they hold the cards, they have all the solutions. If landlords are being more flexible and providers are offering some great solutions for clients, that's only going to drive everyone in the right direction in terms of what prop tech is offered and what solutions are offered for clients. So I think it's a win-win really, and we're doing more work between both our teams on solutions and the one solution that works for clients regardless of the model and the leasing strategy behind it. And I think we'll see more of that.
Sorry, Jack. So the situation that we had probably about a year ago where there was kind of the line between flexible leasehold was still quite blurred, but the situation seems to have been supercharged now, and flexibility, which has been on the tip of everyone's tongue for the past year or so, is now very much there up front, and landlords and operators are going to have to deal with that and bring to the party their own product.
No one owns the word flexible, and
yes, quite.
The point is that it's just different people have a different interpretation. I think the one thing that the pandemic has caused is a realization that flexibility at the moment means sort of 12 months.
Yeah.
And so if you are a landlord and you want to play in this space, you've got to get your head around the fact that it's not a 5-year lease. That's not being flexible. It's, sub 2 year leases that you need to be thinking about. That's genuine flexibility. And that's why it starts to mean that you get this sort of morphing of the two solutions.
And it means looking at deposits, and it means looking at length of tenure, as you say. It means looking at speed of entry. It means looking at all of those kind of regulatory pieces that would have carried on beforehand on both sides, and making sure that they are all offering flexibility where they can. So that's again going to help clients.
So do we think that the way that the market is delivering these the range of products, are we saying that this is here for the long term? It's not a stopgap for businesses. Businesses are now changing the way that they are thinking about their space and how their workforce are occupying that space.
Flexible leasing, generally.
In general, and so both from a leasehold point of view and a flex point of view, are we just in a holding period where in a year's time we might start to see people's kind of old habits come back?
Well, if I can jump in there, I'd say that from the traditional flexible workspace market, so your typical serviced office providers, as we were for many a decade known, we're in the 4th decade of that now. Some would argue 5th, but in terms of evolving and involving the products, services, locations, providers of those kind of services and products. So it's absolutely not a here and now. It's something that will continue to play a very big part, I think, in leasing strategy. And again, I'm sure Chris will agree that on the side of landlords looking at their Cat A plus solutions to the market, disposal spaces, being able to potentially offer a proportion of their stock, let's call it, as fitted let-ready solutions. I think that will only grow in time, again, as a result of the pandemic and their response to it. And it's really the only response you can have, because no business at the moment, like Chris said, is going to go out there and sign up a 10-year lease when they really don't know what's going to be happening with headcount, cash flow, the locational needs, tech, and how that drills down into their working practices over the next even 12, 24 months. So I think that is going to be a client-led change in real estate in the UK anyway.
But there is a part of the market. There are occupiers out there who want to have that assurance of a longer lease. So we're not saying that side of the market has gone. So Chris, there are still tenants who want that longer lease.
Yeah, of course there are. I mean, I think that the reality is, if you're a landlord at the moment and you want to do a deal, you've got to do a deal in the constraints of the market you're in, and the market at the moment is very uncertain. So people are going to want to have flexibility baked in. Fast forward 2 years, when the pandemic, this one anyway, is a thing of memory, distant memory, people will probably return to being comfortable entering into longer leases again. And if you're a landlord, would you prefer a long lease, or would you prefer a really, really short lease? Well, you prefer a long lease. So the model will start to move back across again towards something that looks and feels a bit more traditional. And on Gemma's side, probably you'll find that that's when the operators will feel a bit more comfortable about where they're at and adjust their model back to somewhere closer to where it was. But the point is, with each of these things that happens, everyone just makes a change, and elements of those changes you'll never unchange. And so, it's I think they call it progress.
I think it's majority sentiment, isn't it? Because there are still many businesses who are doing well, and who, again, like you say, a long lease is absolutely where they want to be, need to be, and will continue to be. But it's just sentiment.
But is that so? There's an element of resilience then that needs to be kind of built into people's property strategy going forward. They need to be able to kind of adapt and change, and so therefore that will lead them to a certain product or certain type of office space. And if that's the case, if we are going to see another 6 months of upheaval, or probably 2 years worth, is there something that either of you have found over the past few months that has been a standout kind of key piece of learning that will carry not just yourselves through, but businesses that you're advising through the next few months?
Apart from good internet connection.
I think on the conventional side, the major issue is that there has been a total disconnect between what customers, occupiers, have needed from their landlord and what their landlord's been prepared, or in most cases able, to offer. And that's not the fault of the landlords, it's actually the fault of the people behind the landlords who hold the debt or whatever else, and are putting onerous conditions that are just not flexible on their customers, the landlords. And I think it's been a huge source of frustration, and therefore has led to probably unfair resentment from many tenants against their landlords about an apparent unwillingness to help and sort of walk in their shoes.
So there's been talk of kind of increasing dialogue between a tenant and a landlord, but there is that other part. So people who are kind of loaning to buy the buildings, the ones who are pulling the strings behind the facade, as it were. So dialogue, I'm assuming, will still be key in trying to achieve the best scenarios going forward.
Without a doubt.
And that's not just on the leasehold side, that's also on the flexible side as well.
I mean, for me, I'd say interaction's a big thing. Looking at all of the clients that we've been working with, across the field, they have been talking to us about how do they come back to work? How do they get back to the office? Should they continue to work from home? How do they do remote working? So apart from advising them, on all of these things, we found that looking at the roles within the business and determining which ones are better to engage face-to-face and interact with each other, be it on a day or 2 days a week or whatever, a rotational basis. And we've used that intel to effectively help them find, dare I say, core and flex, to find a model, be it memberships, be it a smaller office, if again they've moved home and they're now without an office lease, then they've been able to get back to the office and actually make some great productivity gains, really. And they've all said how great that is. So I would say that the key driver here is to trial the various leasing options available to you, or at least talk to an advisor, someone specialist in the industry who can help you across the various solutions and leasing types out there, and then figure out what works for your business. And don't be afraid now of giving it a go, because again, you could be looking at something as short as a week, a month, even a day in some cases, albeit you'd still need to sign up for a month, or it's not really going to be much of a trial. But again, you're not having to commit to any large financial obligations.
And before I wrap up, I just want to touch on kind of the workforce and how important it is to get their views and opinion, because obviously the pandemic it really impacts us on a personal level as well as a business level. How important, and I can imagine you're both going to say it is important to take on board the workforce's opinions when planning for that next step, for that next space. Or have I just answered my own question?
I think you're right. I mean, our clients are all doing, they're doing staff surveys. This isn't, one rule from above. I think this is a critical time to make sure that human needs are met and that safety is met, and that, travel planning is a factor, and that, people need to feel safe about their return. And that's what we work with them to support.
I think the only slightly controversial element to my answer would be that I also think that the leaders of businesses need to lead, and actually at times there are some questions that you need to also provide answers to, as well as ask questions of. And I think this is an example of where actually leadership's required, because no one really knows at a kind of basic level what their responsibility is, what the expectation is, and frankly what the business need is. They may have a view on their own personal perspective, but we all have views on our personal perspectives that aren't necessarily relevant or appropriate for work. So, I think the key is leaders need to lead.
And I suppose in a time where we're being bombarded with information, not only from the news, but from work and personal connections, that confusion it will possibly cloud decisions, and these are decisions that cost a lot of money and impact a lot of people's lives. So,
yeah, and the confusion won't be any less. There's not going to be a moment of clarity. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly the government says something coherent. We're going to be living in this scenario, this environment for quite some time, which is why, as I say, people need to kind of step up as best they're able.
And mitigate their risks around that as well, as best they can, especially financial ones, which is, again, one of the things we've been touching on.
So I kind of came into this chat with quite a clear, concise kind of message, and or thinking that there was a clear, concise message. Now I'm thinking, no, the message is actually there's a lot of decisions that are out there. There's a lot of choice out there for businesses. How they navigate the next 6 months is not clear cut, and also it's not clear cut in respect to type of space we're taking, the location of space, how long for. So kind of a small plug, this is where advisors such as yourselves come in and should start to kind of clear a little bit of that wood so they can start to see what's ahead of them. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you for your time, and those people who are viewing this, please do get in touch if we've said anything controversial or helpful in those respects. But yeah, please thank Gemma and Chris, and please do get in touch if you have any questions.
Lovely. Thanks, Shaun.